I was in a relationship. So my gut was telling me that he's going to break your heart, basically, or whatever, right? But my therapist was like, no. It's not him. He's a great guy. He's not going to do that. It's your childhood wound. And yeah, it ended up happening. Now, how do I know if when I'm feeling something, it's for real or it's like that old pattern, which I'm hoping is not going to come back, of like just
If you're hoping it's not going to come back, it's definitely going to come back. Because it's coming back for you to process it. It's coming back. But the emotion that you want to avoid feeling, because if you could control outer reality.
And I'm a control freak.
Well, right? Can you guys see what we're talking about here? So the mechanism you're using is trying to control feeling uncomfortable emotions. Right? You don't want to feel whatever emotion of the heartbreak or whatever the other emotion is. So do I trust my gut? Do I trust the therapist? Do I trust this? How do I get it so this doesn't happen?
Yeah.
But the thing is where is it happening? Inside of you. It's wherever you go, there you are. It's unprocessed energy that's inside the field. So what happens is what you're looking for is understanding as well that a lot of times when it comes to other people we attract into our life. Other people, anytime you hear people say, what about that specific person in the law of attraction community, who's heard the whole SP thing, specific person thing, drives me freaking nuts when I hear it. Because people all the time are like, how do you get back your SP and this and that? And I'm like looking at my YouTube videos, like reading those comments, I'm like, what the fuck is SP? And then I look it up and it says like specific person. And I'm like, okay, specific person, when people want to get back their specific person, replace the word specific person with specific pattern. Because that's really what it is. People, how do I get my specific person back? What you're really saying is, how do I get my specific pattern back? How do I get my specific pattern back? I want the pattern that I know. Even though the pattern that you know may be hot and cold, cat and mouse. That's what I know. That's the pattern I know. And then what we do is we believe it's in other people. Now, ultimately, the love you experience in your life is coming from within you. Other people in your life can reflect back the love that's inside of you, but it's in you. So anytime you've been in love in the past, you can be very quick to say, they caused me to feel this. The connection is what caused me to feel this. They were reflecting something back to you that allowed you to feel the love that's already inside of your body. And then what happened is you felt that and you liked who you were when you were around them. Does this make sense? Yeah. The person you were, whether that person you were was someone that was very open, someone that was very hopeful, someone that was very present. I like that person. I liked who I was when I was with that person. But remember, this person is not the thing. You were generating the emotion. They were a reflection of that thing. Just like the pattern, it's not them. That's the so special one that you need to keep fighting for because that story may feel familiar. What happens is it's a pattern. It's a pattern that maybe feels familiar, but it's reflecting back the pattern that's inside of you. So what happens is this whole process of transformation is really about understanding that everything in the external reality is simply a reflection of your internal reality. And when we stop going around trying to control the external, we end up starting to take our power back. How many of you are aware of the frame technique? Quite a few of you. It's something we'll talk about in the next session, but it basically has to do with feeling the separation between you and other people. So if you are going to have a hard conversation with someone, what you can do is as you are talking to them and you're feeling inside of your own body, you can actually focus on the separation between you and someone else that you're talking about, or you're talking to. And what you do is even if they're not physically there, filling the space in between me and this person, wherever they are in the world, allows me to to feel safe inside my own body. And then what this helps you to do is to realize that if someone else has a reaction to you because of something you're saying, what you can then do is become aware that what they are dealing with and the emotion they are expressing is their emotion. Does this make sense? Yeah. Whereas before, as an adaptive strategy, if you're an empath or someone that feels someone else's energies, is They have tension, so you see their tension, and you assume that their tension is your tension, so you're trying to fix it. So the frame technique helps you separate the energy. And it's beneficial to separate the energy so you don't try to manage their energy. Because as we know, when trying to control energy or dynamics, you carry that pressure on your back and you bring it everywhere you go. And then you create a lot of pressure within yourself, and then you're putting the pressure on yourself to control other people. But when it comes to relational dynamics, that's one thing you can't control. You can't control what other people do. You can't control how other people respond. And you can't control their reactions to your expression. So something to become aware of is when you are talking to other people or you're having a conversation, feeling the separation can be a very powerful tool. And what ends up happening is you can then see that their response is their response. And you can remember the mantra, that's their stuff, not mine. Let's all say that out loud right now. That's their stuff, not mine. Now here's the thing. That energy of their response is their response that you don't need to manage. However, your perception of it and your resistance to it is yours. Does this make sense? You may be carrying the energy that people bombard your energy, that you have to fight for freedom, etc. And that is your responsibility. Your responsibility is your ability to respond. Right? So if someone else has an intense reaction to something you say or to a boundary you set, that's their stuff, not yours. That is true. But your response to it is your thing to own, and how you relate to it is your thing to own. And what your stories you have that maybe initially attracted it is your thing to own. Quick question?
I have a belief that I always attract someone that ends up being narcissistic.
Does every person you meet?
Not everyone. Okay, not everyone. Okay, not everyone. That's okay. Yeah. That's a bold statement.
It's important, by the way, to become aware of the terminologies we use.
Yes.
Because the terminologies we use reflects back what we believe to be true. So if we say that everyone I attract is narcissist or controlling, we literally are infusing and showing that our belief says that everyone, every single one of you is a narcissist. Can you imagine?
Okay. No.
Every one of you, you dirty narcissists, trying to control me, right? But I'm poking fun at the idea.
No,
I understand that's not what you meant.
I get it.
Okay, so
it's fear,
you're going about your life.
Yeah.
Narcissist comes into your life. You become aware of it. You go a different direction.
Yes.
Okay, but then you go somewhere else, and there's another narcissist there. Right? And it just keeps happening. So everywhere you go,
and that's my question. The unconscious belief is there, or the subconscious belief, or the conscious belief, they attract narcissists, is there. I want to shift that. I want to change that.
Here's the question I have for you, and everyone else can use this in your own way. What is that controlling narcissistic person, or whatever energy dynamic is in your life? Have you learned the lesson? Have you learned the lesson? Because these people are coming into your life to reflect back something you believe, but there's also some form of lesson there. And maybe the lesson is to say no to a certain type of energy. Yes. Maybe the lesson is to be vulnerable and to actually express yourself when you would normally back off and not express it, right? So the question is, because then when we talk about how do you actually change in the present moment, what happens is in the moment that you realize someone has this pattern, you can choose to either express yourself, you can choose to pull back your energy, you can choose to cut off a friendship or a relationship that has that pattern, and then that is a part of the transformation. That's a part of it. You say, I learned the lesson. There are certain aspects of my own life where there's certain aspects of certain things I attract, and I become aware of it. And then what I decide that I make the shift within myself. I cut out that pattern. And also, here's another important thing, is choosing your response. Being able to choose your response, not from a level of reactivity, but from a level of presence. Now, I'll give you an example of this. This is something that happened to me just recently. I've talked about this a little bit on social media. But back in this last year, you go and sit down now. Thank you. Let's give her a hand. Awesome. And this will be kind of related, what I'm about to share. So back about a year ago, so recently, how many of you saw that recently I moved to LA? Yeah, I sold a whole bunch of things, moved to LA, and I lived in Austin for a year. And when I first got to Austin, I lived in Austin for 3 or 4 years, but I lived in this house in Austin that was a really nice luxury house that I lived in for about a year. And when I first got into this house, I really wanted the house because it looked nice, and it was in a guard-gated neighborhood, which was something that was important to me. And what happened is I met the owner of this house, and the owner was, I wanted the house. At the same time, there were red flags that were there. It was this woman that was, I could tell, very controlling. Sound familiar? Right? Very neurotic, and in a way had really, really, really high expectations, and she was worried shitless that I was not going to leave the house perfect the way she wanted it, right? So those red flags were there. I liked the house, though, and I did not listen to those red flags. So what happened is I got into this house, and every little thing that I needed, there was like this remote. They're like, don't go into this room over here, this closet with like all these electronics in it. Don't do this, don't do this. They were just super on edge. And I literally, the entire time I lived there, I felt like I was walking on eggshells with everything that I needed. Now, what ended up happening is I lived there for about a year, and then I knew I was moving to LA. So I put in my 30-day notice, and I go ahead. And when I moved in, by the way, let me say as well, the house was furnished. Some of the furnishings I did not like because it was really old furniture I didn't want to use. So I moved it into storage. I paid a professional storage unit of a company to come move it into storage. She was like reluctant for that, but I was like, I don't want this old furniture in my house, but she let me do it, whatever. Basically what happened is once I was moving out of this house, I moved everything back exactly the way that I found it. Like as much as I could leave it, I had photos of it before and after. And I left it as close as I could possibly do it to how everything should be, right? And I, by the way, am also from, I don't have any kids, no pets or animals. I'm a very clean person. And I was like, in my mind, I'm an incredible tenant because I am traveling, I am not home all the time, and I'm paying this really high rent for this house. It was a very expensive monthly rental. Nonetheless, what ends up happening is I move out, I move to LA, I get all the movers to move everything back. It looks like 95% perfect, but the $20-something thousand security deposit I put on the house, I'm like, even if a couple grand out of that comes, it's okay because I just want to, I want to move and everything, and maybe there's a couple grand that comes out. Well, what ended up happening is at the very end of this whole entire experience, I move, back, and I moved to LA. And what happens is it was not good enough for her. Everything, like every little thing, she would find these details. One of the plants outside, there's a landscape guy that comes every week. One of the aloe plants died. And that was my fault because the contract says that I would have, I signed this contract, but basically it said I would make sure the plants were good during the freeze time and all that stuff. Basically, I ended up paying $3,500 for one plant that died, even though there's a landscaper, right? And then what happened is this is the cherry on top. There was one or two other things. I have a Tesla, and I had a Tesla charger put in, but I didn't get written notice. That was like a big deal. Cherry on top, what ended up happening is couple days before I moved out, I was inside. I was inside, doing my nightly routine in the bathroom. And I have this thing called chocolate gold. It's something that's like this. It's basically this turmeric / superfood hot chocolate drink I drink every night. A little bit of it spilled on this countertop. A little bit of it. I went to bed, I woke up, and I scrubbed it out, but you could still see this little smudge, like this big, on this countertop inside this bathroom. Well, what ended up happening is this lady found that, and the repercussions for it were replacing the entire countertop. Not only that, to get it to match, it must also match the other countertop. So we had to redo both countertops inside this master bathroom. It is a nice house, but because in the contract it said I would leave it perfect. It didn't say perfect in the contract, but it's it wasn't there before. And in my mind, I'm like, this is natural wear and tear on a house. I paid this X amount of money per month for this house. If a little spill happens, I shouldn't have to pay for that, right? So I'm going back and forth with this lady, and towards the end, I'm graced because I have an amazing personal assistant, Monica. She was dealing with a lot of this so that I didn't have to deal with it. But eventually what I recognized is that I had to actually deal with it somehow. I actually had to break through this pattern because it was interesting to me. Now, by the way, let me also say this. This lady, her husband His name was Michael. It's my dad's name. Michael was kind of reminded me of my dad in a way where Michael was just kind of walking on eggshells around his girlfriend or wife. Michael was very nice to Monica and I, but he was just doing the marching orders of this controlling woman. So it was very interesting because we just kind of felt bad for the guy because I could kind of empathize with him because I've seen people in his position before. But we're dealing with this, and they're saying, so I'm basically going back and forth with them. It's been 2 or 3 months since we moved out of the house, and I'm just trying to get like whatever of the $20-something thousand security deposit back, right? That's all. I'm just trying to close the loop. But I'm like, what is the lesson in here? Well, there was a few different lessons. On one hand, there were red flags before I even moved into the house. There were red flags that I ignored because I rationalized it because I liked the house. There were other houses I could have chose, but I still chose it. That was one thing. The other lesson was eventually what I did is things weren't really moving along, and then I had this idea that I was going to write a letter about like how I felt. The whole experience of working with her was that she had such high expectations that nobody could live up to, and basically, it was like I wanted her to know that like I've rented multiple. Now, it's going to sound egotistical to say I've rented very nice houses in the past, like $1 million houses. So I say that because this lady's perception of me was like I just came into money or something, or people don't understand when I'm as young as I am living in a kind of like a really nice house like that. So I had to kind of wanted her to know like, hey, I've rented other nice houses before. This has never been an issue, ever. Like I've never had an issue like this before, and your expectations are just too high. So what I ended up doing is after like 2 months of this, she sent me an email that says, if you want to jump on a call, let me know. So I get on a call with her. This is last Monday. This is very recent. So I was like, you know what? I was going on a podcast, and then I tried calling her before the podcast because I was like, now I have a rule for myself. Anytime there's an uncomfortable conversation I have to have, I push myself to have it sooner rather than later. I'm not waiting. This is the new me. This happened with a friend a couple months ago, and it was also before I was going on a podcast, which is funny because I was getting ready to go on a podcast, like, I don't want to deal with this right now, I'll do it afterwards. And I said, no, I'm going to do it now. And I did it before I went on the podcast, knowing that even if they had a weird reaction, I'm going to be okay. Their problems aren't my thing to manage, right? So what happened is I'm like, I'm going to get on a phone with this lady, and I'm gonna tell her my perspective, and also like I understand her perspective, like I understand where she's coming from, and I tried to be somewhat compassionate in understanding it because what I could tell is she's a perfectionist. She wants to look like a perfectionist. So the next tenants that come in, she wants to look perfect for it. So anything that's not perfect is like a reflection on her, and she can't look not perfect because it's a survival strategy for her. Does that make sense? So I was kind of aware of this. I get on the call with her, and what I decided, and I was hopeful that it was going to be like a nice conversation where we both got on the same page. What happened is I get on the call with her, and it was very, very challenging for me not to be reactive and just to say what I like. It was definitely like if I could have done it different, I would have done it a little bit different because it turned into us just going at each other. It was like. She was like, we don't have to go into the details of it, but I was like, never mind. I was in the moment telling that I could tell that this for me, it was interesting because it's a woman that also, the stepmom stuff growing up, right, was a woman. So it was an authority figure. Think about the landlord-tenant dynamic. That's like the authority in my life, because I own my own business and the lifestyle that I've created, is I don't have many things that are that authority now, but a landlord-tenant dynamic is an authority thing, right? So authority, story for me, is that things aren't fair, right? And that that there's some form of controlling woman that you need to protect yourself against. That was it growing up, right? That was my story. So here I am subconsciously have attracted this woman that's controlling and that's very like high standards. And what I could tell is after about 10, 15 minutes of conversation, we weren't getting anywhere, and she was in a way using it as like narcissistic supply, where she just like kept trying to say things to me to like provoking a reaction out of me. And one of the things with people that are like this is if you don't respond at all and you have no emotional reaction whatsoever, it's like death to them. It's like they need it. Like they need it. They will stop arguing with you. Like if you argue with them, you feed them. So in the moment, I was kind of aware of my desire to say, like, listen, your expectations are so high, I don't think you should be renting out your house to people. And now, that's really what I said. And then I was like aware that this is like this part of me that's trying to protect myself. I was like, everyone's tiptoeing around you. The thing that really was hard for her to understand, so when here's another red flag. I moved into the house. She said, someone that cleans the house is this company, and use this company to clean the house, they're great. So I used this company to clean this house, and there's this lady who is super sweet, and when she came into the house, she's like, oh, Miss Jessica's very, very strict. Oh, I don't want to, like, she was so worried to mess anything up in the house, and I'm like, this is kind of weird. You know, like, this lady who did a great job cleaning is so worried she's going to mess something up. Well, what ended up happening is when I was moving out, this lady would not do the clean out move because she knew she'd have to do it 3 or 4 times because nothing she did was going to be good enough. So then I expressed this to the lady, to Jessica. I was like, so even because from the perspective, it looked like it was just me with this crazy perspective. Like, you're just so inconsiderate, but whatever. And I'm like, I'm clean. This is like so going against my identity. But I'm like, even the lady you told me to use as the cleaning lady wouldn't even clean the house because your expectations are so high. And then she was like, you're lying. This is what she said. I was like, why would I lie about that? You know? But it was that, and I just started becoming aware that this is just childish. We're not getting anywhere. And where we ended up, though, is we ended up in a spot where basically we're just closing out the loop as quick as we can. I was going to put up a fight for that whole $4,000 granite countertop thing, saying that's kind of crazy, not fair to pay. At the same time, to go to court on it will cost a lot more money. So I'm like, whatever, I do want to be done with it, but I wasn't going to be done with it without me expressing myself, right? I expressed myself, but what I would have done differently is the moment the energy became childish and it became like her coming at me trying to like get me reactive, I could have just said, listen, I don't like where this conversation is going. I'm going to hang up and you can talk to my assistant. I could have said that. Like 2 minutes in instead of it being a 25-minute like conversation of us going back and forth, right? So I say this from a vulnerable place of, this is a very interesting conversation, obviously, for me to share here in a live event like this. But nonetheless, the lesson there was, first off, the lesson was the red flags, right? There were lots of red flags there. Another lesson or teaching from it was, wow, in this dynamic, I am replaying a similar familiar childhood dynamic that has to do with authority, right? The tenant-landlord dynamic is a power dynamic, right? And I'm responding in a way to this that was similar to childhood. It's like the only area of my life where there could be this power dynamic really, because I don't have bosses or anything anymore, is in this dynamic of like this landlord-tenant thing. So it's playing itself out. So I became aware of it. I was vulnerable and continued to express myself and to like share my perspective on it. But the thing is every time I had to deal with her and I would hear about something she would say that would normally trigger me, it got less and less towards the end where it didn't affect me as much. I felt there were still some reactions, as Monica knows, wherever she is in the room. Because her and I were both dealing with this situation, but it was like, towards the end, it was like less and less affecting me, and I just saw it as more of this neutral thing. If I react to this energy, I'm keeping the energy alive in my field. Do you see? So it's like, oh, this also is a reflection of the old me from a year ago that rented that house, that was kind of like eager to get into a new house, that was kind of like looked through and looked past all these other flaws, you know? So I was like, that's part of the lesson. That was part of the lesson. The lesson was for me to be vulnerable. And even as I was going to have this conversation with the lady, I understood that, there was a certain perspective I had where I'm like, oh, this like crazy neurotic lady, right? Which is also a judgment, by the way. I am judging her as crazy neurotic lady, keeping it active inside of my field that there's crazy people out there that you need to protect yourself from, that you can't write contracts with, right? So it's still active inside my field. So I'm aware of this, but also aware that she is of that dynamic, but I was aware of how I could bring my energy back and not be so reactive to her. And towards the end, it got easier and easier until that big blowout conversation. But even afterwards, I looked at it. I could have judged myself. I could have been like, I could have said this. I could have said that. I didn't say it. Oh my gosh. But instead, I did not judge myself. I gave myself props because before getting in that conversation with her, there was a lot of energy moving in my body. Because part of it felt like I'm getting ready to talk to this lady that is extremely combative, that has, we had this dynamic of me living in her house, so I knew there was going to be an argument involved. But what I realized too is not to say that the argument, I don't even think it was like the wrong thing to do. The thing that like maybe my dad or that was modeled to me growing up is just you don't want to deal with it, right? Just let it go. Just don't deal with it and kind of be passive. And I was like, I'm not going to be passive about this. Like, I've accepted that I'm going to have to pay this money. I've accepted that this was a mistake. I've accepted the lesson, but I don't have to just lay it down and like accept it. I can actually express myself. And that was also a shift into a new pattern, right? Doesn't mean I have to be there forever, but I was doing it also. I wasn't doing it for this. I knew this chick was not going to understand what I was saying. She wasn't going to come on board like, oh my God, you're right. This is my childhood trauma, right? I'm like, does she not know that her childhood trauma is just, it's like everyone has to live according to expectations, and then she's just always pissed off because no one's living up to her expectations, reaffirming her own like shame-based belief or identity. But I'm aware of this, but I'm also aware that that's a projection of mine. I'm also aware that it's it's not my job to change her or to let her see the light or anything. I knew getting on that conversation, I was somewhat hopeful that maybe we could just be on the same page and just close it out nicely, but I very quickly realized that wasn't going to happen. But what ended up happening is I realized that I had the courage to have that conversation was the new me. I was doing it for me. And I knew that it couldn't be something, because normally in my life, I'm able to just pass things on to people in my life that, I have systems set up. I have people that work for me. I could say, hey, can you do this for me? And I could have people do it. But I'm like, no, I knew that I had to be the one to have that conversation. And then I did it, and I learned, and I look back, and I'm like, I would have done it differently. But guess what? It was meant to happen. So the next time, guess what's going to happen? The next time I meet someone and the red flags are there, I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to sign the contract. I'm not going to get into a contractual agreement with someone with that kind of dynamic, right? So it's like that's part of the lesson. The other thing that it made me aware of, though, was that I still have this belief that is subconsciously attracting to me this controlling authoritative figure. What's the what?
When is it gonna stop? You're gonna learn the lesson finally, or?
That's exactly what I'm saying. This is the lesson. This whole thing is the lesson for me. Well, I'm talking about it right now, right? Exactly, which is another good point. This is not something, so what you'll do is sometimes you'll change a certain aspect of your life, or in relational dynamics, like in dating dynamics, this long ago is something I don't attract in dating dynamics. But then what would happen is in other aspects of my life, it might pop up, right? And then closer to me, would get rid of that energy, but now in this kind of it's still a relationship, but it's still it's like this tenant, somebody that's the landlord. You're not having an intimate relationship with them. It's just this kind of like relationship where it's like it's contractual agreement, I guess. But what I'm noticing is the lesson is something that's taking on different forms and still coming in because there's still something to be learned there. It is an ongoing thing. As much as every single one of us would like to have just get the one lesson and be done with it, sometimes it's like whack-a-mole. You do it in one side of your life, and then it comes up over here, and you're like, wait, I thought I already dealt with it, right? But what happens is when you do that, when you heal that energy in a certain aspect of your life, there may be different facets of it that you're not aware of that are still subconsciously there. So whereas before with relational dynamics and love dynamics, there was a certain awareness there, and years ago that got cut out to where I don't attract that energy anymore. However, in the authoritative tenant to landlord dynamic, is something I wasn't consciously aware of. So it's like now that this reflection is here, I'm able to become aware of it, and I'm able to make those shifts inside of myself. I'm able to encourage myself to express myself. I'm able to see the red flags when they're there. And I'm able to also soothe that inner child part of me that feels not safe or that is used to that control. Because a certain part of me, in the same way that I experienced a controlling person growing up, there are certain aspects of my life that I control myself because I put that pressure on myself. So there's a part of me that feels safe and normal When I have to walk on eggshells around a landlord, that at some level must have felt somewhat familiar for it to stay in my life. Does that make sense? It must have felt familiar if it was still there. So what happens is if somebody else, like if somebody that had like was attracting narcissists into their life or whatever, they would see the red flags and then immediately, like they'd see it real quick, or they wouldn't attract it altogether because it's not active in their field. But it's a process of becoming aware. Like all of this is information that helps you become aware of the subconscious energies, dynamics, stories that are in your life. And the thing is some of these energies that are in our life because they're familiar. And the thing that we get to own is we get to own the energy, we get to own the stories, we get to own our dynamic with it and how we relate to it, and we can choose to take our power back. And what I believe I've done this last week is part of it was an echo of a past energy, but part of it was also like, oh, you can feel uncomfortable, have a conversation that's a lot of confrontation, and you're still okay. Interesting, right? But like I said, I wasn't doing it for her to get her to come around, like as if I was trying to convert my ex-stepmom to understand that what she did was wrong, which is the projection, right? But like that was kind of the subconscious energy. It's doing it, no, this is for how I choose to exist in the world. I choose to express vulnerability. I choose to stand up for myself. The uncomfortable energy I felt before I went on that conversation, I was aware of it. I was feeling it. I was letting it be there. Had the conversation. Even though there was no control over the situation to happen a certain way, there was a realization that I can have a conversation and still be good. And I'm still fine. And actually, I felt very much alive after that conversation, not just from the dopamine high of an argument, but I felt like, oh, you can express yourself, and that there's power in that. So there's many different levels to this kind of information of what we can gather from it, but it's an ongoing journey. It's not like there's going to be one thing that happens and it's like, oh, I'm healed and I'm never going to deal with this energy dynamic again. Could be. But the thing is if we put the pressure for that to happen, a lot of times we're creating that resistance anyways. But it's embracing the journey, embracing that this is a process of becoming more and more aware of different energies.
Now, if you want to learn step by step how to apply the frame technique to feel safe in your own reality, to feel confident in your own frame, then I show step by step in a free YouTube video how to apply the frame technique. It's a guided meditation process where I explain it along the way. It's a meditation that is very easy to do, requires no meditation experience. So if you want to check out that video, I'm going to go ahead and put the frame technique right here. Welcome to the frame technique meditation and activation.